Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your entire life has been a lie. That the woman you called mother for 28 years kidnapped you when you were 6. That somewhere out there, a family has been searching for you, mourning you, never giving up hope that you'd come home. This is not a work of fiction. This is the true story of Hannah Collins, a 6-year-old girl who vanished from a summer block party in 1985 and was found alive 22 years later, living under a stolen identity in Arizona. What happened during those missing decades will shock you to your core. Before we dive into one of the most heartbreaking yet miraculous cases in American crime history, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on those notifications so you never miss a case like this. Drop a like on this video because it helps us bring you more incredible stories. And stick around until the end, because Hannah's journey from victim to survivor will leave you speechless. Now, let's get into it. July 14th, 1985. Meridian, Texas. A small town where everybody knows everybody, where doors are left unlocked and children play outside until the streetlights come on. It was the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. Until that summer evening when everything changed. The sun was setting over Meridian, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The annual summer block party was in full swing on Maple Street, a tradition that brought the entire neighborhood together. Families had been gathering since late afternoon, setting up folding tables covered in checkered tablecloths, firing up barbecue grills, and filling coolers with ice-cold drinks. The smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs mixed with freshly cut grass hung in the warm Texas air. Children ran wild through the yards, playing tag and hide-and-seek, their laughter echoing between the houses. Adults clustered in small groups, talking about work, the weather, and local gossip. Someone had brought a radio, and country music played softly in the background. It was picture-perfect Americana, the kind of evening that creates memories families treasure for generations. 6-year-old Hannah Collins was there with her parents, Susan and Robert Collins, and her 9-year-old brother, Michael. Hannah was a first grader at Meridian Elementary, a bright, energetic child with blonde hair that fell past her shoulders and blue eyes that sparkled with mischief and joy. That day, she wore a yellow sundress with white flowers, white sandals, and a matching yellow ribbon in her hair. Her mother would remember every single detail of that outfit for the rest of her life. Hannah had been excited about the party all week. She loved these neighborhood gatherings, loved playing with the other children, loved the special treat of staying up past her bedtime. She'd helped her mother make potato salad that morning, carefully stirring the bowl while Susan added ingredients, her tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when she focused on something important. At the party, Hannah played with a group of neighborhood children near the dessert table. They were running a relay race, dashing from one end of the yard to another, shrieking with delight. Susan Collins watched from a distance, chatting with neighbors while keeping one eye on her daughter. Robert was manning the grill with several other fathers, flipping burgers and swapping stories. Michael was playing basketball in a nearby driveway with some older boys. Everything was normal. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. Susan Collins would later tell investigators that she looked away for just a moment. Maybe 2 minutes. Maybe 5. A neighbor had asked her opinion on something, pulled her attention away from the children playing near the dessert table. When Susan looked back, scanning the yard for that yellow sundress, her daughter was gone. At first, Susan wasn't alarmed. Hannah was probably just playing hide-and-seek, or maybe she'd gone to use the bathroom at someone's house. Susan excused herself from the conversation and walked around the party, casually looking for her daughter. She checked behind the house, in the front yard, around the parked cars lining the street. Nothing. A small knot of worry began to form in Susan's stomach. She walked faster now, calling Hannah's name. "Hannah, Hannah, honey, where are you?" Still nothing. The knot of worry twisted into something colder, harder. Susan's voice grew louder, more urgent. "Hannah, Hannah Collins, you answer me right now." Other parents started to notice Susan's distress. They began calling Hannah's name too, spreading out across the yards. Robert Collins left the grill, his face creasing with concern. "What's wrong?" he asked. Susan's voice shook as she replied, "I can't find Hannah. I can't find her anywhere." Within minutes, the festive atmosphere of the block party evaporated. Adults were searching behind bushes, under porches, inside cars. They knocked on doors, checked basements and garages. Children were questioned, asked when they'd last seen Hannah, where she might have gone. Everyone was looking for a little girl in a yellow sundress. Michael Collins stood frozen in the driveway, the basketball forgotten at his feet, watching the chaos unfold. He'd been playing, not paying attention to his little sister. Guilt washed over him even then, in those first moments. Why hadn't he been watching her? Why hadn't he noticed her leave? 15 minutes passed, then 30. The warm summer evening suddenly felt cold. Someone called the police. The Meridian Police Department received the call at 7:43 p.m., a missing child at a neighborhood gathering on Maple Street. Officer David Reeves was first on scene, arriving within 8 minutes. By then, the block party had transformed into a full-scale search operation. Neighbors were combing through yards, calling Hannah's name into the gathering darkness. Officer Reeves immediately called for backup and began organizing the search. He questioned Susan and Robert Collins, getting a detailed description of Hannah, what she was wearing, when she was last seen. He spoke with the children who'd been playing with her, trying to establish a timeline. The last confirmed sighting of Hannah was at approximately 7:15 p.m. near the dessert table. After that, nothing. Within an hour, the Meridian Police Department had mobilized every available officer. Search dogs arrived, their handlers letting them sniff Hannah's pillow that Robert had raced home to retrieve. The dogs picked up Hannah's scent near the dessert table, then tracked it to the street, where it vanished. This detail would haunt investigators. The scent ending at the street suggested Hannah had gotten into a vehicle. As darkness fell over Meridian, powerful searchlights illuminated the neighborhood. Police helicopter circled overhead, its spotlight sweeping across yards and fields. The Texas Rangers were notified. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team was put on standby. Every person at the block party was interviewed. Every car that had been parked on the street was accounted for and checked. Susan Collins sat on her front porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm night, staring at the chaos unfolding around her. She kept replaying those moments in her mind. When did Hannah disappear? Who had she talked to last? Had there been someone at the party who didn't belong? A stranger lurking at the edges? Susan couldn't remember. Everything was a blur. Robert Collins couldn't sit still. He joined the search parties, walking through fields and wooded areas with flashlights, calling his daughter's name until his voice went hoarse. Michael sat inside with a police officer, answering questions he didn't know the answers to. Did Hannah mention wanting to go anywhere? Did she talk to any strangers? Did she seem upset or scared? No. She was just being Hannah, playing and laughing like she always did. By midnight, over 200 people were searching for Hannah Collins. Volunteers from across Meridian and neighboring towns arrived to help. They formed search lines, walking shoulder to shoulder through fields and along creek beds. They checked abandoned buildings, barns, and sheds. They searched until dawn, and when the sun rose on July 15th, Hannah Collins was still missing. Detective Thomas Garner was assigned as lead investigator. A 20-year veteran of the Meridian Police Department, Garner had worked missing persons cases before, but never one quite like this. A child vanishing from a crowded neighborhood party in front of dozens of witnesses, with no one seeing anything suspicious. It didn't make sense. Garner set up a command post in the Meridian Police Department, covering the walls with maps, timelines, and photographs of Hannah. He assembled a task force of local and state investigators. The FBI sent agents to assist. The case became the department's top priority, consuming every resource, every waking moment. The first 48 hours were critical. Garner knew the statistics, knew that the longer a child remained missing, the lower the chances of finding them alive. He pushed his team hard, working around the clock, following every lead no matter how small. The interviews began in earnest. Every person at the block party was questioned extensively. What time did they arrive? Where were they standing? Did they see Hannah? Did they notice anyone who seemed out of place? Anyone paying unusual attention to children? The investigators compiled lists, cross-referenced statements, built timelines trying to piece together Hannah's movements minute by minute. They identified 3 potential persons of interest from the party. A man who'd arrived alone and left early. A teenager who'd been seen talking to children. A woman nobody seemed to know who'd been standing at the edge of the gathering. Each was tracked down, interviewed, and cleared. The man had left to attend another commitment. The teenager was a nephew visiting from out of town. The woman was a new neighbor too shy to introduce herself properly. The media descended on Meridian. By the second day, Hannah's face was on every television screen in Texas. News vans lined the streets. Reporters thrust microphones at grieving parents, asking how they felt, what they wanted to say to whoever took their daughter. Susan Collins, her eyes red and swollen from crying, made a tearful plea on camera. "Please, if you have Hannah, please bring her home. She's just a baby. She needs her family. We love her so much. Please, please bring her back to us." The Amber Alert system didn't exist in 1985, but law enforcement did everything they could to spread the word. Hannah's photograph and description were distributed to every police department in Texas and surrounding states. Flyers were printed by the thousands. Volunteers plastered them on every telephone pole, storefront window, and community bulletin board for hundreds of miles. Tips flooded in. A child matching Hannah's description was seen at a gas station in New Mexico. Another sighting reported at a motel in Oklahoma. A truck driver claimed he'd seen a man with a young girl at a rest stop. Each lead was investigated. Each one led nowhere. False sightings, honest mistakes, people trying to help, but only adding to the noise. Detective Garner focused on building a profile of who might have taken Hannah. Was it a stranger abduction or someone the family knew? Had Hannah been targeted specifically, or was she a crime of opportunity? The fact that Hannah's scent ended at the street suggested premeditation. Someone had a vehicle ready. Someone had been watching, waiting for the right moment. Garner ordered background checks on everyone at the party, everyone who lived in the neighborhood, anyone with any connection to the Collins family. Sex offenders in the area were questioned and their alibis verified. Robert Collins' co-workers were interviewed. Susan Collins' friends. Anyone and everyone. The neighborhood canvas expanded. Investigators knocked on every door within a 5-mile radius. Did you see anything suspicious on July 14th? Any unusual vehicles? Anyone who didn't belong? Security footage was collected from local businesses, though in 1985, such footage was rare and poor quality. They reviewed every frame, looking for Hannah, for a yellow sundress, for anything. 1 week after Hannah's disappearance, the investigation had generated over 500 leads. None had panned out. The search continued, expanding into surrounding counties. Dive teams searched local ponds and lakes. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search wooded areas. Every abandoned building, every empty lot, every potential hiding place was checked and rechecked. The Collins family was in agony. Susan stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She sat in Hannah's bedroom for hours, holding her daughter's stuffed animals, breathing in the fading scent of her shampoo on her pillow. She kept the yellow ribbon Hannah had worn in her hair clutched in her hand at all times. Robert threw himself into the search, barely coming home, barely speaking to anyone. Michael went back to school but couldn't concentrate. Teachers reported he spent class time staring out windows, his mind somewhere else. The town of Meridian was traumatized. Parents kept their children close, no longer letting them play outside unsupervised. The annual block party, a beloved tradition, would never be held again. The neighborhood where Hannah vanished became a shrine. People left flowers, teddy bears, and candles on the spot where she was last seen. Prayer vigils were held. The local church was packed every Sunday with people praying for Hannah's safe return. Then, in mid-August, the investigation took a dramatic turn. A drifter named Carl Morrison walked into a police station in Louisiana and confessed to taking Hannah Collins. Morrison was 42 years old, a transient with a criminal record including theft and assault. He told investigators he'd been in Meridian on July 14th, had seen Hannah at the block party, had taken her. He claimed he'd panicked and abandoned her in a wooded area near the Texas-Louisiana border. He said he'd show them where. Detective Garner was skeptical, but he had to follow the lead. Confession or not, they needed to find Hannah. Morrison was transported back to Texas under heavy guard. Media coverage exploded. The man who took Hannah Collins had confessed. Parents across the nation watched their televisions, hoping this nightmare would finally end. But as Garner questioned Morrison more extensively, his story fell apart. Details didn't match. Morrison couldn't describe what Hannah was wearing. He couldn't explain how he'd taken her from a crowded party without being seen. When pressed, he admitted he hadn't actually been in Meridian on July 14th, had never seen Hannah Collins, had confessed because he wanted attention, wanted to feel important. Precious days were wasted chasing Morrison's lies. The confession proved to be false, a cruel hoax that devastated the Collins family and frustrated investigators. Morrison was charged with making false statements and obstruction of justice. The real kidnapper remained unknown, and Hannah was still missing. As summer turned to fall, the investigation began to slow. The initial surge of tips and leads dried up. The media moved on to other stories. Volunteers gradually returned to their normal lives. The massive search operations scaled back. Detective Garner refused to give up, but he could feel the case going cold. By October 1985, 3 months after Hannah's disappearance, the investigation had reached a standstill. Every lead had been exhausted, every tip investigated, every possible suspect questioned and cleared. The task force was disbanded, the command post dismantled. Hannah Collins' case was filed away with other unsolved missing persons cases, though Garner kept her file on his desk, a constant reminder of the child he'd failed to find. The Collins family was shattered. The absence of closure was unbearable. They didn't know if Hannah was alive or dead, suffering or safe, close by or thousands of miles away. The not knowing was torture. Susan Collins fell into a deep depression. She couldn't accept that Hannah was gone. She refused to clean out Hannah's bedroom, refused to pack away her clothes or toys. Everything stayed exactly as it was on July 14th, frozen in time. Robert Collins retreated into himself. He stopped talking about Hannah, couldn't bear to hear her name spoken aloud. He worked longer and longer hours, anything to avoid coming home to a house filled with grief and empty spaces. The marriage, already strained to breaking point, began to crumble. Susan and Robert barely spoke. When they did, it often erupted into arguments. They blamed each other, blamed themselves, drowned in guilt and sorrow. Michael Collins, now 10 years old, carried a burden no child should bear. He believed Hannah's disappearance was his fault. If he'd been watching her instead of playing basketball, maybe she wouldn't have been taken. If he'd been a better brother, maybe she'd still be here. The guilt shaped him, changed him. He became quiet, withdrawn, reluctant to form close attachments. He was afraid to love anyone too much because they might disappear too. The years crawled by. Hannah's case remained open but inactive. Detective Garner kept investigating on his own time, unable to let it go. But there was nowhere left to look. He retired in 1989, passing Hannah's file to Detective Laura Mitchell with a heavy heart. "Don't let her be forgotten," he told Mitchell. "She's out there somewhere, I know it. Don't let her become just another case number." Mitchell promised she wouldn't, but the reality was grim. With no new evidence, no new leads, there was little she could do except wait and hope. Hannah Collins' file sat in a cabinet with dozens of other cold cases, children who'd vanished and never been found, mysteries that might never be solved. In 1992, 7 years after Hannah's disappearance, Susan and Robert Collins divorced. The marriage couldn't survive the weight of their shared grief. Susan stayed in Meridian, unable to leave the place where Hannah had last been seen, clinging to the irrational hope that her daughter might somehow find her way home. Robert moved to Dallas, trying to build a new life, though he never truly escaped the past. Michael graduated high school and left for college, relieved to escape the suffocating atmosphere of his childhood home. But he carried Hannah with him wherever he went. Her memory haunted him, shaped his relationships, influenced every decision. He studied criminal justice, drawn to the field by his sister's unsolved case. He wanted to help other families find their missing loved ones, wanted to do for them what no one had been able to do for his family. Every year on Hannah's birthday, Susan lit candles and set a place at the dinner table for her missing daughter. She never stopped believing Hannah would come home. She joined support groups for families of missing children, finding solace in their shared experiences. She became an advocate, speaking at events, keeping Hannah's case in the public eye as much as possible. In 1995, a decade after Hannah's disappearance, a documentary about cold missing persons cases featured her story. The segment was heartbreaking. Susan Collins, now haggard and worn, spoke about the daughter she'd lost, the 10 years of not knowing, the desperate hope that refused to die. The documentary sparked renewed interest in Hannah's case. Tips came in again, but like before, they led nowhere. The town of Meridian tried to move on, but Hannah Collins was woven into its history. New residents heard the story. Children grew up knowing about the little girl who vanished. The house where the Collins family had lived stood as a quiet reminder of tragedy. Time passed, but Hannah was not forgotten. What no one knew, what no one could have imagined, was that Hannah Collins was alive. She'd been alive the entire time, living just a few states away, with no memory of the family desperately searching for her, no idea that she'd been stolen, no concept that her entire existence was built on lies. While the Collins family grieved and investigators searched, Hannah Collins was living in Arizona under a different name, with a different identity, believing a different truth. She was no longer Hannah. She was Emma Keene, and the woman she called Mother was the person who'd destroyed her life. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to Cold Case so you don't miss what happens next in Hannah's incredible journey. Hit that like button too. Now, let's continue. Dorothy Keene was 53 years old on July 14, 1985. She lived alone in a small house in Meridian, on the outskirts of town, a solitary figure that neighbors barely knew. She'd moved to Meridian 2 years earlier from Oklahoma, had no family, no close friends, kept to herself. People who noticed her at all described her as quiet, unremarkable, forgettable. But beneath Dorothy's quiet exterior was a woman consumed by bitterness and desperate loneliness. She'd lived a hard life. Born into poverty, bounced between foster homes as a child, she'd never experienced stable, loving family. She'd married young to escape her circumstances, but the marriage was violent and short-lived. She'd gotten pregnant once, had dreamed of becoming a mother, but miscarried in her second trimester. The loss devastated her. She tried again, but couldn't conceive. The marriage ended in divorce when she was 30. Dorothy spent the next 2 decades drifting from town to town, job to job, never finding the happiness or belonging she craved. She worked as a waitress, a housekeeper, a store clerk, always on the margins, always alone. She watched other women with their children and felt a gnawing emptiness, a hunger that grew more intense with each passing year. By her 50s, Dorothy's loneliness had twisted into something darker. She became obsessed with the idea of having a child, of experiencing the motherhood that had been denied to her. But adoption wasn't an option. She was too old, too poor, too unstable. No agency would approve her. The realization fed her resentment. Why did undeserving women get children while she remained childless? Why was she being punished? Dorothy started watching children at parks and shopping centers. Not obviously, not in a way that drew attention. She just observed from a distance, imagining what it would be like if one of them were hers. She created elaborate fantasies, stories where she rescued neglected children, gave them better lives, became the mother they deserved. When Dorothy moved to Meridian in 1983, she continued this behavior. She learned the routines of local families, noted which children played where, which mothers seemed distracted or neglectful. She was careful, patient, never drawing attention to herself. And then she saw Hannah Collins. Dorothy first noticed Hannah at a grocery store. The little girl was with her mother, sitting in the shopping cart chattering away, her blonde hair catching the fluorescent lights. Something about Hannah captivated Dorothy. Maybe it was her smile, her energy, the way she seemed so full of life. Dorothy couldn't look away. She followed Susan and Hannah through the store, keeping her distance, watching. Over the following months, Dorothy saw Hannah around town several times, at the library, at the park. Each sighting reinforced Dorothy's obsession. In her twisted mind, she began to believe that Hannah was meant to be hers. She learned where the Collins family lived. She drove past their house, watching Hannah play in the yard. She learned Hannah's routine when she went to school, where she played after. Dorothy convinced herself she was rescuing Hannah. In her delusional thinking, the Collins family didn't deserve such a perfect child. They were neglectful, letting her run around unsupervised. Hannah needed someone who would truly appreciate her, protect her, love her properly. Dorothy would be that person. She would save Hannah and finally become the mother she was always meant to be. When Dorothy heard about the summer block party on July 14th, she knew it was her opportunity. A crowded gathering, children running everywhere, adults distracted. Perfect conditions. Dorothy prepared meticulously. She stole license plates from a car in a neighboring town and attached them to her vehicle. She packed a bag with scissors, hair dye, children's clothes. She mapped her escape route out of Texas, planning to cross state lines before anyone realized Hannah was gone. On the evening of July 14th, Dorothy parked her car 2 blocks from Maple Street. She walked to the party, blending in with the crowd. No one paid attention to her. She was just another neighbor, unremarkable and forgettable. She positioned herself at the edge of the gathering, watching, waiting for her moment. She saw Hannah playing near the dessert table with other children. She watched Susan Collins chatting with friends, not looking at her daughter. She saw her chance. Dorothy walked over to Hannah, smiled warmly, and spoke softly. "Hello, sweetheart. Do you like puppies?" Hannah, friendly and trusting like most 6-year-olds, nodded enthusiastically. Dorothy continued. "I have 2 puppies in my car, just down the street. Would you like to see them? They're so cute and fluffy." Hannah hesitated, glancing around for her mother. Dorothy added quickly, "It's okay, honey. Your mom said it was fine. We'll just be a minute." That lie was all it took. Hannah, believing this nice lady had permission from her mother, followed Dorothy away from the party. No one noticed them leave. Within minutes, they were at Dorothy's car. "The puppies are inside," Dorothy said, opening the back door. Hannah climbed in, expecting to see puppies. Instead, Dorothy got in beside her, locked the doors, and drove away. By the time Hannah realized something was wrong and started crying, they were miles from Meridian. Dorothy drove through the night, heading west toward New Mexico. Hannah cried and begged to go home. "I want my mommy," she sobbed. "Please, I want to go home." Dorothy, her heart pounding with adrenaline and twisted triumph, spoke soothingly. "It's okay, sweetie. Your mommy and daddy asked me to take care of you. They had to go away for a while. You're going to stay with me now. Everything will be fine." Hannah didn't believe her. Not at first. She cried for hours until she was exhausted. Dorothy stopped at a remote rest area in the early morning hours. She took Hannah into the bathroom and cut her hair short, cropped it close to her head. She applied dark brown hair dye, transforming Hannah's blonde locks. She dressed her in different clothes, boys' clothes, just in case anyone was looking for a girl in a yellow dress. Hannah was too frightened and confused to resist. She was 6 years old, alone with a stranger, terrified. Dorothy continued driving, crossing into New Mexico, then Arizona. She stayed in cheap motels, paid with cash, never used her real name. She monitored the news, saw the reports about missing Hannah Collins from Meridian, Texas. She saw Susan Collins' tearful plea on television and felt no remorse, only satisfaction. She'd done it. She'd taken Hannah, and no one knew who she was or where she'd gone. After a week of traveling, Dorothy settled in a small town in rural Arizona, far from Texas, far from anyone who might be looking. She'd already created false documents for Hannah, a forged birth certificate listing her as Emma Keene, Dorothy's daughter. She'd planned this for months, had connections from her years of drifting who could provide such documents for the right price. Dorothy enrolled Emma in no schools, kept her isolated from other children. She homeschooled her, teaching her basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, but more importantly, teaching her a new history. Dorothy told Emma repeatedly that her name was Emma Keene, that Dorothy was her mother, that she'd been born in California, that she'd always lived with Dorothy. When Emma protested that this wasn't true, that she remembered her real family, Dorothy grew angry. "Those people weren't your real family," Dorothy would say harshly. "They didn't want you. They gave you to me. You're mine now. Your name is Emma. You need to forget those other people. They're gone. They're never coming back." She'd repeat this daily, sometimes kindly, sometimes angrily, breaking down Hannah's resistance, reshaping her memories. For a 6-year-old child, memory is fragile. Hannah's recollections of her life before gradually faded under Dorothy's relentless manipulation. She remembered fragments, images, feelings of a yellow dress, a brother's face, but they became dreamlike, unreal. Dorothy's version of reality became Emma's truth. She was Emma Keene. Dorothy was her mother. This was her life. Dorothy moved them several times over the years, always to small towns, always staying under the radar. She worked low-wage jobs, cleaning houses, waitressing, anything that paid cash. She kept Emma isolated, never allowing her to form friendships, never letting her attend public school where records might be checked, questions might be asked. Emma's entire world was Dorothy and their small home. She knew nothing else. As Emma grew older, Dorothy's control became more sophisticated. She monitored everything Emma read, watched, listened to. She didn't allow her access to newspapers or internet where she might see stories about missing children. She told Emma they were too poor for television, though really Dorothy was afraid of what Emma might see. She kept Emma dependent, frightened of the outside world, believing that Dorothy was her only safety, her only family. Emma accepted this. She had no choice. She couldn't remember her real family clearly. The memories were too fragmented, too much like dreams. Dorothy was all she knew. And despite the isolation and control, Dorothy did provide for her basic needs. Emma had food, shelter, clothes. Dorothy wasn't physically abusive. Her abuse was psychological, subtle, invisible to anyone who might have noticed. The years passed. Emma grew from a child into a teenager, then a young woman. She'd internalized Dorothy's teachings, believed the lies so completely that they weren't lies anymore. They were simply her life. She was Emma Keene, homeschooled, socially awkward, isolated but safe with her mother. The life of Hannah Collins had been erased so thoroughly that it no longer existed. But memory, even suppressed and buried, has a way of resurfacing, and truth, no matter how deeply hidden, eventually finds its way to light. By 2007, Emma Keene was 28 years old. She'd never been to college, never had a job outside the home, never had a romantic relationship. She still lived with Dorothy, now 75 years old, in a small rental house in Arizona. Emma helped care for Dorothy, who had developed health problems. Their life was quiet, isolated, unchanging. Emma had few friends. The isolation of her childhood had made her socially anxious, uncomfortable around others. She did volunteer work at a local library, shelving books, a job that required minimal interaction. It was there that she met Karen, another volunteer, who slowly became Emma's first real friend. Karen was warm and outgoing, the opposite of Emma's shy nature. She drew Emma out, invited her for coffee, asked about her life. Emma was evasive, always had been. She told Karen she'd been homeschooled, that she didn't have much family, that she lived with her mother. Karen didn't push, accepted Emma as she was. Their friendship was simple but meaningful. Through Karen, Emma began to glimpse a larger world. Karen talked about her travels, her family, her experiences. Emma listened with a hunger she didn't quite understand. She'd been content, or so she thought. But Karen's stories awakened something in her, a restlessness, a sense that maybe there was more to life than the small, controlled existence she'd always known. One day, in early spring 2007, Emma was cleaning Dorothy's bedroom. Dorothy was napping, and Emma was organizing the closet, something Dorothy usually forbid. In the back of the closet, behind boxes of old clothes, Emma found a shoebox. Curious, she opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, dozens of them. Emma pulled them out, began reading. They were all about the same story. A missing child named Hannah Collins who disappeared from Meridian, Texas in July 1985. Emma read article after article, her hands beginning to shake. The descriptions of Hannah Collins were detailed. 6 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, wearing a yellow sundress. Last seen at a neighborhood block party. Emma stared at the photographs accompanying the articles. A smiling 6-year-old girl. Those eyes looked familiar. Impossibly familiar. Emma's mind raced. Why did Dorothy have these clippings? What did this missing girl from Texas have to do with them? Emma searched through the box more frantically. There were more articles from later years. A 10-year anniversary story, a documentary mention, all about Hannah Collins, the girl who vanished and was never found. And then Emma found a photograph at the bottom of the box. A picture of a little girl with blonde hair and a yellow sundress. But this wasn't a newspaper photo. This was an actual photograph, the kind you'd keep in a family album. Emma turned it over. On the back, in faded ink, was written a date. July 4th, 1985. Emma felt dizzy. That was 10 days before Hannah Collins disappeared. Why did Dorothy have a personal photograph of Hannah Collins? It didn't make sense, unless... Emma's stomach dropped. A memory surfaced, hazy and distant, like looking through fog. A yellow dress, the smell of barbecue, laughter, a brother's face, a different house, a different name. Hannah. Her name was Hannah. No, that was impossible. Emma shook her head, trying to clear it. These were just dreams, fantasies she'd had as a child. Dorothy had always told her she had an overactive imagination. This couldn't be real. But the photograph was real. The newspaper clippings were real. And that 6-year-old face in the yellow dress looked exactly like Emma remembered looking in her few childhood photos. Emma heard Dorothy stirring in the other room. Panicking, she shoved the clippings and photograph back into the shoebox and put it back in the closet. She left the bedroom, her heart pounding, her mind spinning with questions and impossible suspicions. Over the following days, Emma couldn't stop thinking about what she'd found. She tried to act normal around Dorothy, but questions burned inside her. She began testing Dorothy, casually asking about her childhood, about where they'd lived when she was small, about relatives, about anything that might confirm or deny the wild suspicion growing in her mind. Dorothy's answers were vague, evasive, sometimes contradictory. When Emma pushed too hard, Dorothy grew angry. "Why are you asking all these questions?" she demanded. "I've told you about your childhood 1,000 times. Why can't you just accept it?" Emma backed off, frightened by Dorothy's intensity, but more convinced than ever that something was wrong. Emma began sneaking into Dorothy's closet when she could, looking through the shoebox, reading the articles more carefully. She memorized details. Hannah Collins, born March 3, 1979. Disappeared July 14, 1985, from Meridian, Texas. Parents Susan and Robert Collins, brother Michael Collins. Emma checked these facts against what she knew about herself. Dorothy had always said Emma was born in March 1979. The dates matched. Emma's hands shook as the realization solidified. What if she was Hannah Collins? What if Dorothy had kidnapped her? It seemed insane. It was insane. But the evidence was there, the clippings, the photograph. Dorothy's evasiveness. Those hazy memories that Emma had always dismissed as dreams. They fit. Everything fit. Emma started trying to find official documentation about herself. Birth certificate, social security card, medical records. Anything that would prove who she really was. But Dorothy had always handled such documents, had always told Emma she'd keep them safe. When Emma asked for them, claiming she needed them for job applications, Dorothy refused. "You don't need those right now," Dorothy said, her voice sharp. "I'll get them when you really need them. Stop bothering me about this." The refusal was damning. If Dorothy was really Emma's mother, if everything was legitimate, why wouldn't she provide simple documentation? Why was she so defensive? Emma confided in Karen, her friend from the library. She was careful, didn't reveal everything, just said she was having trouble getting her identification documents from her mother and didn't know what to do. Karen suggested Emma go to the Department of Motor Vehicles herself. "You're 28 years old," Karen pointed out. "You have a right to your own documents. The DMV can help you get duplicates of your birth certificate and social security card. You don't need your mother's permission." Emma was terrified, but desperate. In late April 2007, she went to the DMV without telling Dorothy. She brought what little documentation she had, an old library card, a utility bill with her name on it. She explained to the clerk that she'd lost her identification and needed to get replacements. The DMV clerk began processing her request, typing Emma's information into the computer. Name: Emma Keene. Date of birth: March 3, 1979. Place of birth: Dorothy had always said California, but Emma realized she didn't know which city. The clerk asked for Emma's social security number. Emma gave the number Dorothy had given her years ago. The clerk frowned at the computer screen. She typed more, checked something, frowned deeper. "Just a moment," she said, getting up and walking to a back office. Emma's heart pounded. Something was wrong. The clerk returned with a supervisor. They spoke in low voices, glancing at Emma. Then the supervisor approached. "Miss Keene," the supervisor said carefully, "there seems to be an issue with your documentation. The social security number you've provided doesn't match your name and birth date in our system. Can you provide any other forms of identification?" Emma's mouth went dry. "I don't have anything else. That's why I'm here. My mother has my birth certificate and I need to get a copy." The supervisor's expression shifted to something like concern. "I see. Ms. Keene, I'm going to need you to wait here for a moment. We need to verify some information." She walked back to the office, and Emma saw her pick up a phone. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers entered the DMV. Emma's world tilted. The officers approached her gently, asked if she was Emma Keene, asked if she'd come in to get identification. Emma nodded, unable to speak. One officer said, "Ma'am, we need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. You're not in trouble, but there's a discrepancy with your identity that we need to sort out." At the police station, Emma sat in an interview room, terrified and confused. Detectives introduced themselves, asked Emma to tell them about herself, her background, her family. Emma told them what she knew, or what she thought she knew. She was Emma Keene. She'd been born in California. She'd lived with her mother Dorothy her whole life. They'd moved around a lot. She'd been homeschooled. She didn't have many official records. The detectives listened carefully. Then one asked, "Emma, have you ever heard the name Hannah Collins?" Emma's breath caught. She couldn't lie. She nodded slowly. "I found newspaper clippings about her in my mother's closet, articles about her. Disappearance in 1985. The detective's expression changed. "Can you tell us about that?" Emma explained what she'd found, the shoebox, the articles, the photograph, her growing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. As she spoke, tears began streaming down her face. "I think I might be Hannah Collins," she whispered. "I think Dorothy might have taken me." The detectives exchanged glances. They asked Emma if she'd be willing to provide fingerprints. Emma agreed, hands shaking. A technician came in, carefully rolled each of Emma's fingers across an ink pad and then onto paper. The prints were scanned into a database that contained fingerprints from missing children cases going back decades. Emma waited in the interview room, drinking terrible coffee, her mind numb. She thought about Dorothy at home, probably wondering where Emma was, probably worried. Or maybe not worried, maybe angry, maybe preparing to run. Emma didn't know what to feel. If her suspicions were true, Dorothy had stolen her entire life. But Dorothy was also the only mother Emma remembered, the only family she'd known for 22 years. 45 minutes later, the detective returned. His face was grave. He sat down across from Emma and said quietly, "Emma, we got a match. Your fingerprints match those of Hannah Marie Collins, who was reported missing from Meridian, Texas, on July 14, 1985. You are Hannah Collins. You've been missing for 22 years. The words didn't make sense. Emma stared at the detective. "That's not possible," she said. But even as she spoke, she knew it was true. All those fragmented memories, those dreams she dismissed, they were real. The yellow dress, the brother, the different house, they were her memories, her real memories. "Where is Dorothy Keene right now?" the detective asked. Emma gave them the address. Within the hour, police descended on the small rental house. Dorothy was arrested without incident. She sat in the back of the police car, her face emotionless, as officers searched the house and collected evidence. They found more newspaper clippings, hidden throughout Dorothy's belongings. They found false documents, including Emma's forged birth certificate. They found photographs of young Hannah with her blonde hair before Dorothy had cut and dyed it. They found notebooks where Dorothy had written out her delusional justifications for taking Hannah, convincing herself she was rescuing the child. The evidence was overwhelming. Emma, still at the police station, was told that her real family had been contacted. Susan Collins, Robert Collins, Michael Collins. They were on their way. Emma would meet them soon. The detective asked if Emma was okay. She wasn't. She couldn't process any of this. 22 years. Her entire life had been a lie. Everyone she'd known as Emma Keene didn't exist. She was Hannah Collins, and she didn't even know what that meant. News of the discovery spread rapidly. By evening, media outlets across the nation were reporting the miraculous story. Hannah Collins, missing for 22 years, found alive. The little girl who'd vanished from a Texas block party had been living in Arizona the whole time, held captive under a false identity. It was the kind of story that captivated millions, a case that had seemed hopeless suddenly resolved in the most unexpected way. Susan Collins received the phone call at 8 p.m. Arizona time, 6 p.m. in Texas. A detective from Arizona informed her that her daughter, Hannah Collins, had been found alive. Susan dropped the phone. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. After 22 years of grief, of hoping against hope, of never giving up, her daughter was alive. Alive. Robert Collins was notified at his home in Dallas. He sat down on his couch and wept. He'd spent 22 years trying to forget, trying to move on, believing Hannah was gone forever, and she'd been alive this entire time. Michael Collins, now 30 years old, was at work when he got the call. His supervisor told him his mother had been trying to reach him urgently. Michael called Susan back, and she could barely speak through her sobs. "They found her, Michael. They found Hannah. She's alive. Our Hannah is alive." Michael left work immediately, drove straight to his mother's house. They made arrangements to fly to Arizona the next day. That night, Emma stayed at a police safe house. She couldn't go back to Dorothy's house. She couldn't be alone. A victim advocate stayed with her, trying to help her process the trauma, the shock, the complete upheaval of everything she'd ever known. Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Dorothy in a jail cell, about the family she was about to meet, strangers who were supposed to be her parents and brother, about Hannah Collins, a name that was supposedly hers but felt foreign. The next day, April 27th, 2007, Susan, Robert, and Michael Collins arrived in Arizona. They were brought to the police station where Emma was waiting. The reunion was coordinated carefully, with counselors and victim advocates present to help navigate the intense emotional situation. Susan entered the room first. She saw Emma sitting at a table, a young woman with short brown hair and frightened eyes. Susan's steps faltered. This was supposed to be her 6-year-old daughter. This was a stranger. But Susan moved forward, tears streaming down her face. "Hannah?" she whispered. Emma looked at this woman who was supposed to be her mother. She didn't recognize her. There was no flood of memories, no instant connection. Susan looked like a stranger. Emma's voice shook as she said, "I don't remember you. I'm sorry. I don't remember anything." Susan's face crumpled, but she nodded. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. We'll figure this out. I'm just so glad you're alive. I never stopped looking for you, never stopped hoping." She wanted to embrace Emma, to hold her daughter after 22 years. But she could see Emma's discomfort, her fear. Susan held back, respecting Emma's space. Robert entered next. He stood in the doorway, staring at Emma with an expression of complete devastation. His little girl. She'd grown up without him. He'd missed her entire childhood, her entire life. "Hannah," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm your father." Emma looked at him and felt nothing. No recognition, no familiarity. Just a strange man claiming to be her dad. Then Michael came in. Emma looked at him and something flickered in her memory. A boy's face, playing in a yard. Was that real? She couldn't be sure. Michael approached slowly. "Hey, Hannah, I'm Michael, your brother. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." His voice was thick with emotion, with 22 years of guilt. Emma didn't know what to say. These people were grieving, rejoicing, overwhelmed, and Emma felt numb. She was supposed to be Hannah Collins, but she felt like Emma Keene wearing someone else's name. The disconnect was profound and frightening. The reunion lasted several hours. The Collins family tried to share memories to help Emma remember. They showed her photographs from before her abduction. Susan had brought Hannah's favorite stuffed bunny, kept all these years. Emma looked at the photos and saw a child who might as well have been a stranger. She couldn't connect the little blonde girl in a yellow dress to herself. Counselors explained that memory loss was normal in such situations. Emma had been 6 when taken. Those memories had been actively suppressed by Dorothy for over 2 decades. They might never fully return. The family would have to build new relationships, couldn't rely on the past that Emma couldn't remember. The legal situation was complex. Emma was an adult now, 28 years old. She could make her own decisions. She could choose where to go, what to do. The Collins family hoped she'd come back, to Texas with them, but they couldn't force her. Emma didn't know what she wanted. Everything was happening too fast. Dorothy Keene was charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, identity fraud, and numerous other crimes. She was held without bail, considered a flight risk. Prosecutors prepared for what would be one of the most high-profile trials in recent Arizona history. The evidence against Dorothy was overwhelming, but Emma would need to testify, to face the woman who'd raised her, who'd lied to her, who'd stolen her life. In the days following the discovery, Emma stayed in Arizona but began meeting regularly with her biological family. The process was slow, painful, awkward. Susan wanted to mother Emma, to make up for lost time, but Emma was a grown woman who'd been mothered by Dorothy, however dysfunctional that relationship had been. Robert wanted to be the protective father, but he'd been absent for 22 years. Michael was the easiest. He didn't push, didn't demand. He just talked to Emma, shared stories about his own life, let the relationship develop naturally. Emma began therapy, intensive sessions to help her process the trauma, the identity crisis, the grief of losing Emma Keene and having to become Hannah Collins. The therapist explained that Emma was mourning. She'd lost her identity, her understanding of herself, her entire reality. Even though that reality had been false, it was all she'd known. The grief was real and valid. Emma also had to deal with overwhelming media attention. Her story was everywhere. Reporters wanted interviews. Book deals were offered. Movie producers called. Everyone wanted a piece of Hannah Collins' miraculous return. Emma refused all media requests. She couldn't handle that level of exposure when she was barely holding herself together. Dorothy Keene's trial began in October 2007. Emma, now legally going by Hannah Collins, though she still thought of herself as Emma, had to testify. She sat on the witness stand and looked at Dorothy sitting at the defense table. Dorothy stared back with an expression Hannah couldn't read. Was it love, possession, defiance? Hannah didn't know. Hannah testified about her life with Dorothy, the isolation, the control, the lies about her past, the suppression of her memories. She described finding the newspaper clippings, her growing suspicion, the terror of realizing her entire life had been a fabrication. She testified about the love she'd felt for Dorothy despite everything, the confusion of having to see someone she'd called mother for 22 years as her kidnapper. Dorothy's defense attorney tried to argue that Dorothy had provided for Hannah, had cared for her, had never physically harmed her. They painted Dorothy as a mentally ill woman who'd convinced herself she was rescuing Hannah from neglect. They asked for leniency, for psychological treatment rather than prison. The prosecution countered that Dorothy had stolen Hannah's childhood, her adolescence, her young adulthood. She'd stolen 22 years from Hannah and her family. She'd kept Hannah prisoner, isolated and controlled, living a life based on lies. Dorothy had never sought help for her mental illness, had never shown remorse, had destroyed countless lives through her selfish actions. Susan Collins testified about 22 years of grief. Robert testified about the guilt that had destroyed his marriage and his life. Michael testified about growing up in the shadow of his missing sister, the burden of misplaced blame. The testimonies were devastating. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Dorothy Keene guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Dorothy showed no emotion as the sentence was read. She looked at Hannah one last time before being led away. Hannah couldn't tell if Dorothy felt any regret. She suspected not. In Dorothy's delusional mind, she'd done nothing wrong. She'd kept the child she believed was meant to be hers. After the trial, Hannah faced the difficult decision of what to do with her life. She could stay in Arizona, could return to Texas, could go anywhere. The Collins family hoped she'd come home to Meridian, but they didn't pressure her. Hannah needed to figure out who she was, what she wanted, on her own terms. Hannah spent time with Michael, her brother, who'd become her anchor through all of this. Michael understood her better than Susan or Robert. He didn't have the weight of parental expectation, didn't need Hannah to be the daughter they'd lost. He just wanted to know his sister, whoever she was now. They spent hours talking, building a relationship from scratch. Michael told Hannah about their childhood, about the games they'd played, the adventures they'd had. He showed her videos from before her disappearance, home movies of birthday parties and holidays. Hannah watched herself as a 6-year-old, a stranger child who laughed and played. It didn't trigger memories, but it helped her understand who she'd been. Hannah also spent time with Susan, learning about her mother's 22-year vigil. Susan showed Hannah her bedroom, still preserved exactly as it had been in 1985, the toys on the shelves, the clothes in the closet, the yellow ribbon from the day she disappeared, kept in a jewelry box. Hannah was overwhelmed by the love and grief contained in that room. Susan had never stopped believing Hannah would come home. Robert was more distant. The years had built walls he didn't know how to dismantle. He loved Hannah desperately, but didn't know how to show it. They had awkward meals together, struggled through conversations. Robert's guilt at having given up hope years ago ate at him. Hannah sensed his discomfort, but didn't know how to bridge the gap. Hannah made the decision to move back to Texas, not to Meridian, but to a nearby city where she could be close to her family but have her own space, her own life. She needed to build an identity as Hannah Collins, not as a replacement for the daughter her parents had lost, but as her own person. The transition was difficult. Hannah had to learn to navigate the world as herself, not as Dorothy's controlled dependent. She got a job at a bookstore, simple work that didn't require extensive background or experience. She made friends, slowly, carefully. She dated for the first time in her life. Everything was new and terrifying and exhilarating. Hannah continued therapy for years. The work of integrating Emma and Hannah, of accepting that both were parts of herself, was ongoing. Her therapist helped her understand that she didn't have to completely reject Emma. That identity, though based on lies, was still part of her experience, her survival. She could honor what Emma had been while becoming Hannah. Hannah also began advocating for missing children. She spoke at conferences, worked with organizations that searched for cold case victims. She used her platform, her story, to bring attention to the thousands of children still missing, still waiting to be found. In 2012, 5 years after her discovery, Hannah testified before Congress about child abduction and the importance of maintaining missing persons databases. Hannah's testimony was powerful. She described how a simple DMV flag in a database had saved her life. She emphasized that cold cases aren't hopeless cases, that families deserve answers even decades later. She pushed for more resources for missing persons investigations, for better technology, for never giving up on finding the lost. In 2015, Dorothy Keene died in prison. She'd been serving her 30-year sentence for 8 years. Hannah was notified of the death and felt a complicated mix of emotions: relief, grief, anger, guilt. Dorothy had stolen her life, but she'd also been the only mother Hannah had known for 22 years. That bond, however twisted and dysfunctional, was real. Hannah mourned the woman who'd raised her even as she hated what that woman had done. That same year, Hannah published a memoir titled The Girl Who Came Back. The book detailed her abduction, her years with Dorothy, her discovery, and her journey toward healing and reclaiming her identity. It became a bestseller, bringing national attention to issues of child abduction and long-term trauma. Hannah donated proceeds from the book to organizations that helped find missing children. Hannah's relationship with her family continued to evolve. She grew closer to Michael, who became her best friend and confidant. Her relationship with Susan improved as Susan learned to see Hannah as the adult she was, rather than the 6-year-old she'd lost. Robert remained somewhat distant, but they found small ways to connect, usually through Michael, who served as a bridge between them. In 2020, 15 years after her discovery, Hannah married. His name was Daniel, a man she'd met through her advocacy work. Daniel had lost a sibling to abduction who'd never been found. He understood Hannah's trauma, her need for space and patience. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and understanding. The wedding was small, intimate. Susan and Robert both attended, sitting in the same room for the first time in decades. Michael walked Hannah down the aisle. It was a moment of hope and healing for the entire family. In 2022, Hannah gave birth to a daughter. She named her Grace, a name that represented the second chance Hannah had been given, the miracle of being found, the grace of being able to build a new life. Holding her daughter for the first time, Hannah wept. She thought about Dorothy, about the twisted need for a child that had led to Hannah's abduction. She thought about Susan, who'd lost a daughter for 22 years. And she vowed that Grace would grow up safe, loved, and free. Today, in 2024, Hannah Collins is 45 years old. She lives in Texas with her husband Daniel and their daughter Grace, who is now 2 years old. Hannah still works as an advocate for missing children. She consults with law enforcement on cold cases. She speaks at events. She helps families navigate the impossible grief of having a loved one disappear. Hannah has built a relationship with Susan, who is now in her late 60s. They talk regularly, visit often. Susan is involved in Grace's life, a grandmother who cherishes every moment. Robert passed away in 2023, and Hannah grieved the father she'd never fully gotten to know. At his funeral, she spoke about forgiveness and the tragedy of stolen time. Michael remains Hannah's closest family relationship. He's married now with children of his own. Their kids play together. Hannah and Michael talk almost daily. He's the person who knew her both as Hannah before and as Emma after. The person who accepted her through all the confusion and identity crisis. Their bond is unbreakable. Hannah still struggles sometimes. She has nightmares. She experiences anxiety around crowds. She's hypervigilant about Grace's safety in ways that worry her therapist. But she's also healed in remarkable ways. She's built a life she's proud of. She's made peace with her past, with both Emma and Hannah existing as parts of her whole. The town of Meridian hasn't forgotten Hannah. Every year on July 14th, the anniversary of her disappearance, there's a memorial. But now it's also a celebration, a recognition that Hannah came home. The neighborhood where she was taken has a small park named in her honor, a place where children play safely, where families gather, where hope persists, even in the darkest circumstances. Hannah's story has inspired changes in how missing persons cases are handled. The database that flagged her false identity at the DMV has been expanded and improved. More resources are allocated to cold cases. Families of missing children have found hope in Hannah's return, believing that miracles can happen even after decades. But Hannah is clear that her story is rare. Most missing children aren't found. Most families don't get the reunion she got. That's why her advocacy work is so important to her. She wants to help find the others, wants to give other families the miracle she was given. Looking back, Hannah can see how many things had to align for her to be found. If Dorothy hadn't been so controlling about documentation, if Emma hadn't found those newspaper clippings, if she hadn't gone to the DMV, if the database hadn't flagged her information, any one of those things not happening, and Hannah might have lived her entire life as Emma Keene, never knowing who she really was. The psychological impact of what Hannah experienced is profound. Experts who've studied her case talk about the trauma of identity erasure, the challenge of integrating dual identities, the grief of mourning a self that never existed. Hannah has become a case study, helping mental health professionals understand how to treat other survivors of long-term abduction. Hannah has also spoken about the complicated feelings she has toward Dorothy. She doesn't forgive what Dorothy did. The abduction, the lies, the stolen years are unforgivable. But she also recognizes that Dorothy was mentally ill, that her actions came from a place of desperate loneliness and delusion. Hannah has worked hard not to let hatred consume her. She's focused on healing rather than vengeance. The relationship between Hannah and Susan is particularly complex. Susan mourned a 6-year-old daughter for 22 years. The woman who came back wasn't that child. Susan had to grieve the daughter she lost while building a relationship with the adult stranger who shared that daughter's DNA. It took years of therapy, patience, and love, but they found their way to each other. Hannah has also had to navigate public perception. To the world, she's the miracle girl, the one who came back. People expect her to be grateful, happy, healed. But the reality is messier. Hannah deals with PTSD. She has trust issues. She struggles with her sense of self. The public narrative of miraculous reunion doesn't capture the daily work of living with trauma. Despite all this, Hannah has found joy. She loves being a mother, loves watching Grace grow. She loves her work helping other families. She loves the life she's built with Daniel. She has found meaning in her suffering, has transformed her trauma into purpose. That doesn't erase what happened, doesn't make it okay, but it makes it bearable. Hannah often thinks about the sliding doors moment of her life. What if Dorothy hadn't approached her that day? What if she'd said no to seeing the puppies? What if someone had noticed her being led away? Her entire life would have been different. She would have grown up as Hannah Collins, with her family, with her brother, with memories and experiences stolen from her. But she also wouldn't be who she is now. The Emma years, horrible as they were, shaped her. She can't wish them away without wishing away parts of herself. This is the philosophical complexity Hannah grapples with. Can she hate what Dorothy did while acknowledging it made her who she is? Can she grieve Hannah's stolen childhood while valuing the strength Emma developed to survive? These aren't questions with easy answers. Hannah works through them in therapy, in conversations with Michael, in quiet moments alone. Hannah's story has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, and countless news articles. She's become a public figure in the missing persons advocacy community. She uses that platform carefully, always emphasizing that the focus should be on the still missing, not on her. She doesn't want to be seen as special or lucky. She wants to be seen as a survivor who's paying forward the miracle she was given. The technological aspect of Hannah's discovery is significant. In 1985, there was no integrated database system. Missing children's fingerprints weren't automatically flagged in DMV systems. The infrastructure that led to Hannah's discovery didn't exist when she was taken. By 2007, technology had advanced enough that Dorothy's false documents triggered alerts. Hannah's case has been used to advocate for even more sophisticated systems to catch identity fraud and find missing persons. Hannah has also spoken about the isolation she experienced with Dorothy. 22 years with no friends, no school, no life outside Dorothy's control. That level of isolation is its own form of torture. Emma was imprisoned not by bars but by lies and manipulation. She was trained to be afraid of the outside world, to believe that Dorothy was her only safety. Breaking free from that psychological prison was as difficult as the physical discovery. One aspect of Hannah's story that often gets overlooked is the community impact. Meridian, Texas, was traumatized by Hannah's disappearance. Parents became fearful. Children lost their sense of security. The annual block party, a cherished tradition, ended forever. When Hannah was found, the community experienced collective relief and joy. Her return helped heal wounds that had festered for 2 decades. Meridian could finally close a painful chapter. Hannah has returned to Meridian several times since her discovery. Walking through the neighborhood where she was taken is surreal. The houses look both familiar and foreign. She's tried to trigger memories, standing in the spot where she was last seen, but nothing comes. Her life as Hannah Collins before July 14, 1985, remains mostly lost to her. Those memories are gone, erased by Dorothy's systematic manipulation and the simple passage of time. Michael has told Hannah that the guilt he carried shaped his entire life. He became a social worker specializing in family services, driven by his failure to protect his sister. He's helped countless families through crisis situations, in some way trying to make amends for not saving Hannah. Since her return, Michael has been able to release some of that guilt, though it never fully goes away. Hannah tells him it wasn't his fault, that he was 9 years old, that there was nothing he could have done. Michael knows this intellectually, but can't quite believe it emotionally. Susan's 22-year vigil is its own remarkable story. She never dated again after her divorce from Robert. Her entire life became about keeping Hannah's memory alive, advocating for missing children, refusing to give up hope. Other families of missing children found inspiration in Susan's persistence. When Hannah came home, Susan's faith was vindicated. But she also had to adjust to the reality that Hannah didn't need or want the mothering Susan had saved up for decades. Their relationship had to be built from scratch, adult to adult, not mother to lost child. Robert's story is sadder. He gave up hope years before Hannah was found. He'd convinced himself she was dead, had tried to move on. When Hannah came home, Robert was overwhelmed with guilt. Why had he stopped believing? Why had he moved to Dallas, created distance from the search? Robert tried to make amends, but the relationship never fully developed. When he died in 2023, Hannah mourned not just her father, but the relationship they never got to have. The legal aftermath of Dorothy's conviction raised interesting questions. Dorothy had created an entire false identity for Emma. There were tax implications, educational fraud, identity theft on a massive scale. Untangling the legal mess took years. Hannah had to legally reclaim her identity as Hannah Collins, prove who she really was, correct decades of false records. The bureaucratic nightmare was its own kind of trauma. Dorothy never explained why. She chose Hannah specifically. Was it the blonde hair, the sunny disposition? Was Hannah just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Dorothy refused to cooperate with psychologists trying to understand her motivations. To her death, she maintained that taking Hannah was justified, that she'd saved Hannah from something, though she could never articulate what. Dorothy's delusion was complete and impenetrable. Hannah has thought a lot about the parents who never get closure, the families whose missing children are never found. She knows how lucky she is, how rare her story is. That knowledge drives her advocacy. She speaks to families who are still waiting, still hoping, still searching. She tells them not to give up. She tells them that miracles happen, even if they're rare. She gives them hope while being honest about the pain of waiting. The question of forgiveness is complicated for Hannah. Can she forgive Dorothy? Should she? Forgiveness implies that what Dorothy did could be excused or understood. Hannah doesn't believe that. But she also doesn't want to be consumed by hatred. She's worked to release the anger, not for Dorothy's sake, but for her own. Carrying that rage would destroy her. So she's found a middle ground, acknowledging the horror of what happened while refusing to let it define her present. Hannah's marriage to Daniel is significant because it represents trust. After being manipulated and controlled by Dorothy for 22 years, trusting anyone was terrifying for Hannah. Daniel's patience, his willingness to let Hannah set the pace, his understanding of her trauma, all of these created a safe space for love to grow. Their relationship is proof that trauma doesn't have to prevent connection, that healing can happen even after the worst betrayals. Becoming a mother brought up unexpected emotions for Hannah. She understood Dorothy's longing for a child in a new way. Not that it excused Dorothy's actions, but Hannah could comprehend that desperate need. She was also terrified of being like Dorothy, of being controlling or manipulative. She works consciously to give Grace freedom, to trust her, to not let fear dominate their relationship. It's a daily effort. Hannah's advocacy work has led to tangible changes. She's consulted on legislation regarding missing persons databases. She's helped train law enforcement on cold case investigations. She's raised awareness about long-term abduction and its psychological impacts. Her story has been used in educational settings to teach about child safety without fear-mongering. Hannah has transformed her trauma into meaningful change. The media attention has been both blessing and curse. Hannah's story brought awareness to missing persons issues, but it also exposed her to scrutiny and invasion of privacy. She's had to set firm boundaries, declining most interview requests, limiting her public appearances. She speaks when she chooses to, on her terms, about topics she wants to address. She's learned to protect herself and her family from the consumption machine of true crime media. Hannah thinks about Dorothy's death and what it meant. The woman who stole her life died in prison without showing remorse. There's a finality to that, a closing of a chapter. Hannah didn't attend Dorothy's funeral. She didn't feel obligated to. But she did think about Dorothy when she heard about her death, thought about the lonely, disturbed woman whose actions rippled through so many lives. Hannah felt sadness, not for Dorothy specifically, but for the waste of it all, the unnecessary suffering. Looking at Grace, Hannah sometimes wonders what her own childhood would have been like if Dorothy hadn't taken her. Would she have been close to Michael? Would she have chosen the same career paths? Would she be the same person? These are unanswerable questions, but Hannah thinks about them anyway. She mourns the childhood Hannah Collins who never got to grow up normally, even as she acknowledges the strength Emma Keene developed through adversity. The Collins family has created new traditions. They gather for holidays now, something they couldn't do during the fractured years of Hannah's disappearance. Grace has grandparents, an uncle, cousins. She's growing up with family surrounding her, the family Hannah never had. There's healing in watching the next generation grow up safe and loved. It doesn't erase the past, but it creates hope for the future. Hannah's story ends not with perfect resolution, but with ongoing life. She's still healing. She's still discovering who Hannah Collins is. She's still working through trauma. But she's also living, truly living, in ways Emma Keene never could. She has autonomy, choice, freedom. She has people who love her for who she really is. She has purpose and meaning. She has Grace and Daniel and Michael and Susan. She has a future that belongs to her. The message of Hannah's story isn't just about the miracle of being found. It's about the strength required to survive. It's about the possibility of healing even from profound trauma. It's about the importance of never giving up on missing persons. It's about the complexity of identity and the resilience of the human spirit. It's about hope existing alongside pain, healing existing alongside scars. Hannah wants people to remember that there are thousands of missing children still out there. Her story is rare and remarkable, but it shouldn't distract from those still missing. She uses her platform to keep their names alive, to push for resources, to remind people that every missing person is someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's sibling. They all deserve the same chance Hannah got. If Hannah could go back and change what happened, would she? She's asked this question sometimes. The honest answer is complicated. She wishes Dorothy had never taken her.